So let's start off with this is kicking it off again. It's always Joe Tegmeyer. He's out there creating videos, fly over drones over Gig Texas. And what he's saying now is he's seeing more and more Cybercab testing in larger numbers. Hard for me to count the actual numbers as they were constantly driving around the factory. Sometimes I saw 3 at once. His guess is at least 5, perhaps a few more. And then he shared some interesting photos. What's interesting in fourth image. So, a bunch of Cybercabs driving around Giga Texas, as we've been seeing for the last 2 months, actually. But this last photo here, if you look closely, just like we've done in the previous one, you can actually see a steering wheel. So that's kicked off a number of people talking again. And the difference is that now we're in late February. And so people are still wondering, okay, maybe the Cybercab, they're going to create the low-cost vehicle might actually be the Cybercab. Omar says seeing Tesla Cybercab with a steering wheel shouldn't be that surprising. They could be using it to validate the vehicle drivetrain, FSD, and so forth. So yeah, it could just very well be something that you need to do to validate things that are happening in the car. We can't draw any conclusions about whether something like this would actually ship. But it does get me thinking about what the more affordable models will look like and why we haven't seen it anywhere. One explanation could be that the new, more affordable models look a lot like the Cybercab on the exterior. The Cybercab looks great, so this would be pretty exciting. Of course, quite a few changes would need to be made for a manually driven vehicle. You probably want seats that are closer to the front so the driver can steer, ideally 5 seats, a charge port. This new, more affordable model, starting production soon, wouldn't be a Cybercab. That would be designed as a ground-up driverless vehicle. But you could maybe have a cybercar built on a Model Y line that shared quite a few similarities and much of the supply chain of Cybercab. This could be priced around $30,000. Laura said on Ride the Lightning that these new models are coming soon within the next few months. So yeah, I guess Omar's taking a middle of the road here. He's saying, sure, it can look like the Cybercab, but the insides won't be it. I guess there's multiple options of what can be. And then the debate started, right? If it was a stripped down Model Y, I'd imagine it wouldn't take this long for it to come to market. Which is an interesting argument, right? Because some people are saying the reason we haven't seen it is that they take the existing Model 3 and Y, you just strip it down and sell it for cheaper. Then why is it taking this long for that to come to market? And that's what Omar said. Another good point. Why would it take years to come out with a stripped down Model Y? So what's your take on all this? And of course, there's lots of other nuance we'll go through.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to figure out because Elon did say there will never be a Cybercab with steering wheel and pedals, but there's nuance to the way that he answered that question. And yes, maybe you wouldn't call it a Cybercab if it had steering wheel and pedals. Maybe to Omar's point, it would be a cybercar instead of a Cybercab. And that type of question mark is, one of the things that people are digging into. We know from Lars's comments that, the really big challenge that they have right now, 3 and Y are, between the two of just the Y itself is the, best-selling car in the world. And so the size of that supply chain is immense. It's the biggest supply chain in the world. And so then to change anything about the Model Y, it requires that you have to do that at immense scale. And you can think of the size of this supply chain almost like momentum or inertia in physics, that it, in order to change the direction or the speed of the supply chain at this size requires a lot more force than other things. And so that's why they didn't introduce 48 volt architecture or full gigacastings for everything I think in the case of the Model 3. I'm still unsure of whether or not we have full castings for the Model Y or not. I know at one point that Austin was producing Model Ys with front and rear gigacastings. Then they actually eliminated the front gigacastings and they went to rear only, and they went back to stampings for the front. Maybe they're back to full castings, but we do know that the Model 3 refresh did not have full castings. And but then also that with the 48 volt architecture comes the steer by wire capabilities. If you don't have 48 volts, you can't do steer by wire. And so they didn't implement all of these technologies into the refresh 3 and Y because it was just too many things to change at once for a supply chain of this scale. And if Cybercab is going to sell more units than the Model Y, then we have to think very carefully about how we ramp up a supply chain from nothing, essentially, to selling 1.5 times, perhaps 2 times, or even more the number of units that Model Y sells. And so I think there are 2 different ways that this could be done effectively. One of them is what Omar described, but the other one is actually to double down on the 3-in-Y platform, but to offer that stripped down version with giga castings and 48 volt architecture and steer by wire, to go ahead and introduce all of those technologies into only this stripped down variant of the Model Y while you ramp up that supply chain. And eventually, once the supply chain gets ramped up, you can transfer them back up into the other more expensive variants of the car. But you need a lower volume sandbox to play in to get that supply chain ramp going. And that is another option that they could do the same thing. And then additionally, one of the things that they could do, we also heard Lars talking about the Cybercab will have plastic body panels, and they'll have an integrated step where they paint the plastic body panels in the mold while they're doing the injection molding process. And you can also think of a world where they go ahead and they do that for the 3-in-Y as well. So the cheaper 3-in-Y, they'll have way fewer features than the higher end versions of the 3-in-Y. They'll have plastic body panels instead of metal body panels. They won't have paint. You'll only be able to get them in 1 or 2 colors. You won't be able to get them in a variety of colors. But they will have castings. They will have definitely a smaller LFP battery pack. And they will have 48 volt architecture and steer by wire, which will be lighter. It will be cheaper. Ultimately, it might be a little bit more expensive as they're getting the ramp going. But once they get to full volume, all of those things, the plastic body panels, 48 volt architecture, steer by wire, and castings would reduce the COGS. And so you really could sell the 3-in-Y. Like just those things alone will help reduce your COGS on your 3-in-Y. Then if you decontent, if you have simpler seats that are not heated and cooled, you don't have the infotainment center in the rear, you don't have any of the special lighting, your sound system is way more stripped down, like all of these extra things, you really can get to a point where you've dramatically reduced the COGS on that stripped down 3-in-Y, and you can sell it. And another thing is, it's kind of nice to have higher volume of these larger format cars as you're rolling out your Cybercabs, because then you can reserve the 2-seater for the Cybercab. But when you do need to have robo-taxis that are larger, these stripped down 3-in-Y cars actually really work very well. And you could even, imagine a version that has no steering, like a stripped down 3-in-Y that has no steering wheel and pedals either, that are 4-seater vehicles. As we, really get into the ramp of the Cybercab. And so that's just a whole nother option that Tesla could pursue, in whether they went that route or whether they went the route of having a cyber car with maybe 4 seats, steering wheel and pedals. Either one of those offers them the ability to really start ramping up the supply chain for all those extra components. But the thing that I like about the 3-in-Y version compared to the 2-door Cybercab version personally is that I think that the demand for a cyber car with a steering wheel and pedals would be way larger than the demand for a stripped down 3-in-Y. Now, I think there's going to be quite a bit of demand for a stripped down 3-in-Y, but I think the demand for a cyber car would be even larger than that. And if you want to match the ramp of your supply chain with your demand closer so that you don't have super, super long wait times, then I would lean more in the direction of the 3-in-Y. And then it also kind of reduces the risk. Like, it's not as many new things for you to do that with the 3-in-Y as it is to go to a cyber car. And so I would probably lean 60 to 70% towards stripped down 3 and Y versus Cybercar. But like I said, either one are completely feasible and completely possible.
It's fun. That's why I'm loving this debate. But you actually made me think of something, just blew my own mind. Like I go, okay, maybe what they're doing, we're going to listen to Lars and what he talks about, right? He explained why the issue with the issue with the supply chain delays, and that's why they can't. Maybe what they're doing is creating a stripped down Model 3 and Model Y, but the old version of Model 3, the old version of Model Y. That's why we haven't seen them out there. And like you say, the components of that they're going to do a Cybercab, which is the body panels, makes sense. Components of it makes sense. That's, we'll see, but I can be convinced otherwise as well, because you said about the market for the Cybercar. It's a drivable kind of Cybercab. It's going to be larger. But let's listen to what Lars said, because there's some hints here, I think.
I have to politely ask you here, as someone very high up in a company that literally sent an instruction manual to other manufacturers about how to do a 48-volt system. Why not do a 48-volt system on your highest volume car?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we will in time. It's like, it's not a, that we created the 48-volt supply chain for automotive with Cybertruck.
Yeah.
And some of the components, carry back and will go in our other systems. But like, again, when you're talking about that many units a week, it's a lot of supply chain to bring up, even in terms of just like, the power electronics needed to run 48 volts. And so, we are beholden at some rate to our supply base's capabilities. And like, we can bring them along kicking and screaming so fast. But, we will get all our cars to 48 volts. Cybercab's 48 volts, Cybertruck's 48 volts. I think we're trying to manage that supply chain and bring
Roadster must be, right? Because that's steer-by-wire too.
Yeah, bring the whole world with us at the same time,
So he talked about 48 volt, why they did not include into the Model Y variant, or the new Model Y, because supply chain issues. And so in the same case, now that makes you think, right? That means that these new vehicles probably can't have those either. But the Cybercab will. So,
well, so the thing about ramping those supply chains is you cannot do step changes with a supply chain.
Yeah.
You need to ramp continuously and smoothly. So what you don't want to do is say, hey, on this date, we are going to be manufacturing cars 100% non-48 volts. And so we need all of the components for all of that. And then a week later, we're going to switch over and we want to make the exact same number of cars that we were making before, but we want them to be all 48 volt architecture. Like going through these, especially when you're talking, like you can do that actually if you're talking about low volume. But then if you're talking about cars that are selling millions of units a year, well, that's a whole different story. And so you need these transitionary paths where you have, like, this is why they introduced 48 volts on the Cybertruck to begin with, because Cybertruck was a much lower volume product compared to the 3 and the Y. And so they've already started to ramp up and build up this entire supply chain using the Cybertruck platform, and Cybertruck is going to continue to ramp. But now what they need is another vehicle platform that is in between where the Cybertruck sells and where the 3 and the Y and the Cybercab eventually will. So like they're saying, yes, the Cybercab is going to do these eventually. Well, you're talking about Cybertruck here or Cybercab like way up here, and you need something in the middle as that stepping stone that can get you from where we are today to the 48 volt architecture supply chain that can support million. Ultimately, I think we're going to be talking about selling, and he said right there, eventually we're going to get all of our cars over to 48 volt architecture. So if they're selling, 2 million 3 and Y roughly a year, and then another 2 million Cybercabs a year, and then maybe 1 million between Cybertruck, S and X, Semi, maybe some other things like, well, and when I say 2 million, it'll be more than 2 million with 3Y and whatever some of these new vehicles end up being. But ultimately, you're talking about 5 million plus easily a year supply chain of 48 volt architecture systems. And right now we are in the like maybe 100,000, units per year range. And so you've got to grow that by, what is that, 50x roughly from where we are. We'll just assume that we're talking about the 3 and Y. This would also include a cyber car if they did that. But if you first sell just the stripped down version with all gigacastings, 48 volt architecture, and steer by wire, then you go from there back up to the performance, because that's the next lowest volume. So you do it by volume. Then you introduce those there, and then you come and you backfill from the performance back down to the entry, like the standard range, current lowest price 3 and Y.